Welcome to the Hiding in Plain Sight podcast, where we explore the transformative power of inclusivity and the strength found in vulnerability. I'm your host, Lindsey Mazza, and with each episode, together we will go on a journey of reconnecting with all parts of ourselves to foster healing and inspire a more inclusive and compassionate world for all. So grab your headphones and settle in for soul-fulfilling discussions that will make you laugh, provoke thought, and be the catalyst for growth. Let's dive in. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Hiding in Plain Sight podcast. I'm so excited for today's guest. Today we have Dave Dame, and Dave is a seasoned technology executive who is passionate about designing and developing hardware and software for users of all abilities. He has extensive experience in inclusive design, design thinking, product management, and agile delivery. Dave is a champion for accessibility and builds high-performing teams fostering cognitive diversity and inclusion. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you for having me, Lindsey.
Yeah, I'm so excited to dive in, and maybe I'll just, give the listeners a little background as to how you and I got introduced. So Dave and I were introduced through Rick Hansen, Canadian icon and strong advocate for disabilities and inclusion and accessibility. If you don't know who Rick Hansen is, then I don't know where you've been, because
that's right. When we all followed at that age, and it was interesting to meet him a few months ago because I had the pictures of me giving him the check for high school when he was doing his Wheels in Motion tour way back when. So it was great to meet him a number of years, 30 plus years after the fact, and to see kind of what his impact has made.
And it's funny because I met Rick when I was about 10, and we've reconnected, all this time after. Rick has been not only a Canadian icon, but I think for people with physical disabilities, visible differences, he's really been an anchor, I think, for the community and a representative of all of the possibilities in life.
Right? He brings hope, right? I think I met him in 1986, 87, somewhere in there for when he was doing his Man in Motion tour. At that time, there wasn't really an icon with somebody with a disability that somebody like myself with a disability, with cerebral palsy, could look up to, right? So being able to see someone do what to most people would seem impossible, to go clear across the globe in his wheelchair over walls and stuff, really kind of gave that North Star for people of my generation to look up to.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I think the coolest thing, there's so many cool things about Rick, but the coolest thing for me is looking at the life as we know it that he's lived, is that he has an acquired disability. He is in a wheelchair due to an injury, and he turned that tragedy that he experienced in his life, and he made it his life's mission to help advance the world and make it a more accessible place.
And still remain authentically himself, right? He was big into physical activity, athletics, so he was able to keep his authenticity while he was pivoting to now his new purpose in the world because of his accident that he acquired. So it's a great balance of keeping your own authenticity and really aligning your purpose with what life throws your way. He said something that someone I knew I looked up to. It was great to meet him 30 plus years after when he was in Waterloo, but it was just nice.
Yeah. Grateful for him connecting us, and we share a passion for changing the landscape for what it looks like for people with disabilities. So do you want to speak to that a little bit, Dave? About your life's experience and the work that you do in helping advance accessibility.
Sure. Well, when I was born in 1971, my parents were told I may not live past 12. And even if I could, I wouldn't be able to speak clearly, if at all. They actually advised my parents to put me in an institution. My parents didn't want to really make that one decision that would impact the rest of my life. So they became my champions and advocate to really change the landscape of how school boards saw disability and get me into regular school and really push and champion my way to grade school, high school, and university beyond. And, I had parents that realized I was different, but didn't treat me like I was different, right? Like, when I was in OAC, I didn't know if I wanted to go to school for computer science or business, or do I want to just take a year off and find myself, right? And my parents were very blue collar, so taking a year off to find myself was off the table. But I remember my dad walked down the stairs and said, David, let's be honest, you're not going to be a fireman, police officer, or construction worker. But you know what else you're not going to be? Living under my roof for free the rest of your life, so you better figure it out.
I love
So
that.
that kind of tough love, not tough love, but just keeping it real, that really moved there. And ironically, because I was never in a place with other people I was the only one with a disability for the most part. In high school and university, there was a few more of us. But when I hit the workplace, I was usually the only one. So I have companies that are just seeing a professional with a disability for the first time. I want to get my job and career going with what I've learned and what my expertise is. But it was almost a weight you had to carry. Like, I didn't get into accessibility, Lindsay, until 4 years ago when I joined Microsoft. I purposely avoided it because I thought, how convenient is it to have the guy in a power wheelchair chirping about accessibility? So I purposely stay away from it. And I led a lot of products to market and grew product base and designed amazing things and led organizations, but never really thought about accessibility as a job. But then the pandemic hit. And I don't know about you, Lindsay, but when the pandemic hit, you really do soul searching on what you want your life to be. At that time, I was like a senior VP leader at a major bank. And I'm like, I've done everything I wanted to do. What now? And then I did a leadership talk on Microsoft. And they're like, we'd like to hire you. But the roles were showing me we're not interested. And even when this role of accessibility came, I'm like, I don't have a lot of expertise in it. Beyond my lived experience, it's not like I know all the what you need to be fully compliant and all that. But when I interviewed the lady who was going to be my boss, I was honest. I was like, you saw my resume, right? There is nothing in accessibility on this. But she said, you're an incredible storyteller and you've led. Because previously to then, I changed the way companies thought about delivering product to be more agile, more product focused, more design focused. But I had that ability to be able to influence the way they operated and worked. She saw that I could really change the way people think in building product for people with disabilities. She goes, you're going to lead a lot of and I do. I have like fabulous experts in my team now that's human-centered design. So I have accessibility professionals, human factors professionals, user research and cognitive sciences that really care about the human of all abilities. I've learned a lot in the last 4 years because you have to, but just really connecting and really changing the organization to really get these things into roadmap, to advocate and to really get these things out, to really address people with disabilities, what they need to really be successful and how they work, learn, live, and play.
I love that. There's so many teachable moments just listening to you talk about your career trajectory, because I think it's interesting that you weren't in accessibility until 4 years ago. And, I find that to be so relatable. And the topic of accessibility and DEI efforts is really at the forefront of the news right now. And I've been talking to a lot of people, and, the reality is people who need accommodations or accessibility because of disability are not normally at the table having these conversations. And we're not wanting to be the one always, saying, hey, we need this and I need that in order to do a job, because we've experienced the discrimination of not getting hired for the job, right? So you don't want to don't want to raise even more issues because you're looking to be hired. And it's this vicious cycle of like, we'll quietly figure it out for ourselves. And I think it's amazing that Microsoft has the insight to understand that somebody with a lived experience is going to be offering so much knowledge and problem solving skills in the area of accessibility.
Well, as people with disabilities, like we're just natural problem solvers.
Exactly.
In a world that wasn't designed for us, both in physical, culture, and everything else, you learn to be a good problem solver. I like to say people with disabilities have two jobs. They have the job they get paid, that they got hired, that they get paid for to do. But they have the second job of teaching the organization how to accommodate them, to get the most out of them, to get that talent out that we don't get paid for. We have two jobs and only get paid for one. And we still got to outperform others just to even get the same kind of recognition level. At 54 years old now, it kind of gets a little tiring at times.
It is. It's exhausting. And the topic of how not accessible the legal profession has come up a lot for me this week in conversations with people. And the courthouse that I practiced law at for 11 years is not accessible. They have the standardized accessible button to get into the courthouse, but once you're in there, like the doors aren't accessible into the courtrooms. And I was on the committee probably 9 years ago to try and make changes, but every time I went to the meeting, I was stonewalled, and it's to this day remains unchanged. And it's exhausting because you're just trying to do your job, which has more barriers, as you explained. And I think that what needs to shift is we need to stop placing the onus on people with disabilities to keep raising the flags of like, this is why it's not accessible. It would be wonderful if we could create standardized accessibility and everybody get on the same page.
I think we do have some standards, but the challenge is standards are the bare minimum, right? They
Exactly.
the lowest common denominator. But I remember when door openers were not even thought of as a standard. It was just a nice to have. And I'm like, how can I come into your organization to make a difference if I can't even open the door?
Right.
And I remember my first job, like you said, we're just happy we get the job. We feel we have to be like uber grateful that you hired us. And in my first job, I found out my wheelchair couldn't fit in the bathroom. And if it was now, I'd be like, hey, we need an accessible bathroom. But back in 94, 95, I was afraid because it took so long to get my first job to mention anything. So I would hold going to the bathroom 12 hours every day till I got home. So imagine every day for 2 years, for 12 hours, I did not go to the bathroom. I'd watch how much water I drank. And the reason why it was 12 hours, my first job, even though I had a degree, was paperwork and really kind of an administrative role. But with my hands, that really didn't lend itself to, getting it done the same time as my peers. Because my peers would get it done at 8, and then I took 12. But I was the first one that got a PC on my desk. And there was the new thing called the internet that was coming around. So instead of like organizing all the training logistics through paperwork, I designed a website where people could register themselves and places could offer up, hey, we'll host it, and they would do it online. So what was taking me 12 hours now only took me 3 hours. So the guy in the wheelchair was getting things done in half the time the rest of his peers did, which only then gave me the attention where everybody's like, hey, what more things can you do with technology? How can you lead change to do this? What do you need? Do you need a bigger team, more computers? And I'm like, you know what? I would just really like a bathroom. And I remember my boss was like, he realized in those 3 years, he never once saw me in the bathroom. And he
Oh,
goes, why didn't you bring it up to me? And I'm like, why didn't you ask me? I said, I was
right.
so concerned to get my first job that I didn't feel comfortable or brave enough to ask. It was only when I was getting all the accolades by finding this new way of doing something that increased productivity at 200%. Now I was kind of maybe level with everybody else, even though it was such a huge accomplishment, that only then in 1993 or 4 is when I got hurt.
Wow. I hope people listening really sit with that, because that is the message that I'm really trying to hammer home now, is that's a form of discrimination, right? And it's not something that people are aware of or even think about. But so there's so many moments in your life as somebody with a disability that you were quietly suffering, forced to be resilient, and nobody knows about it because you don't want to flag that attention, which will then create overt discrimination, right? So that, I mean, that I feel that right in my heart. That hurts me that that happened to you, but I also totally understand the position that you were in. And I think, let's stop expecting people with disabilities to be resilient. I kind of hate that word.
Well, the thing is, they give us praise for being resilient,
Right.
but we have no other option,
I
right? It's not
know it's not a
like it's
choice.
like trust me, if there was a more easier way to do it and less frictionless, hey, we would love to get our day done as soon as everybody else. We
Right.
would love to have that ease of spontaneous doing something and planning. But when you don't, and this is what you have to do to live the life that we're fortunate to have, it means we have no other choice to be resilient. So thank
Yes.
you for acknowledging it, but yet it'd be a better world if we didn't have to be resilient.
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, so I'm assuming, did they get you the accessible
Oh yeah,
bathroom?
oh
Yeah,
for
okay.
sure.
Okay.
But it took me having to do this magnificent accomplishment at the time
Yeah.
to really even get ears that were ready to listen. Like I wasn't looking for a parade because it wasn't like I was smarter than anyone else, but the paperwork for me was a problem, a bigger problem for me than it was my peers. So in solving it for me, I was able to solve it for everyone else. And if you look at the accessibility product landscape, when
Hmm.
we build solutions to solve for people with disabilities, everybody else benefits that too. Like audiobooks were originally made for blind people
Right.
to consume content. Now people listen to audiobooks while they're driving, while they're doing other things. So the beauty of doing inclusive product making is, and I didn't even know this until I joined Microsoft, but when you study disability and you can see real human limitations in interacting with their technology, you can study those problems because people without disabilities can easily mask it or overcome it because they have physical ability or they're not dealing with extra challenges. So it's hard for a product maker to notice it. But when you study people with disabilities, when they get friction, it stops them. So by
Hmm.
studying the problem and solving that mismatch, it really then makes it more unconsciously pleasant for every other user.
Absolutely. And it's the one kind of adversity requiring an accommodation or accessibility that will impact everybody at some point in their lifetime. We have an aging population. Anybody who ages and is lucky enough to, live into their 70s, 80s, 90s is going to need an accommodation. Yet we spend the least amount of time and effort fixing the world so that it's just easier for everybody.
We're ready for them, right? Like we're all going to be disabled.
Yes.
You and I just beat them to it. So when you're designing for us today, you're really setting the stage for your future self.
Exactly.
That should be the motivator. And think about even like we don't have that many accessible spaces or accessible washrooms. So think about the lineups we're gonna have, Lindsay, when everybody else becomes disabled. We're gonna be like, wow, they didn't increase the bathrooms. Now we gotta wait in line.
Right? Yeah. Yeah, it's and that's why we keep having to have this conversation, and it's important that we bring it to the forefront, and I think that I believe that most people want to help, and it's, ignorance exists in all facets of life, but I think part of the issue is people are afraid to ask the questions because they don't want to be offended. And that's the beauty of you and I being willing to talk, because let's have the conversations. Let's not focus on cancel culture and be able to drive this conversation forward to bring awareness.
Well, they're not even like open to become. It's just a lot of work to solve for disability. Let's be
I
honest.
know.
It's complex, but that complexity and simplifying it amplifies so greatness because you get your best creative minds to come together to have that conversation to solve these things. That's what a true designer is. That's what true product making is about, is really going through the complexity in order to achieve the simplicity, to have, user delight and to really enable people to do great things. And that's what technology's been for me.
Let's talk about, you do speaking, right? You have your TEDx and you do would you call it motivational speaking or keynote speaking?
Yeah, I do keynote speaking on like leadership, innovation, agile, because that was changing from the way you worked at. But now I talk more about inclusive design, accessibility, and still leadership, right? Like, leaders need to set the space where curiosity and problem solving can happen. But yeah, I do talks about it all the time. And, being told that you would never be able to speak clearly, if at all. And now to be able to be on stage to really amplify, like people like you and I, when we get in front of people, we're able to influence a great number, whoever's in the room, whether it's 20 people, 40 people, or thousands. We get the ability to get them to, for a brief moment, experience the world from our eyes.
Yes.
Even though you're a lawyer, you have the same legal knowledge as every other lawyer in the room if you're talking to them. But you're the only lawyer who is a female with a disability that had a unique path to do that. And to be able to see what it is, and let's take away the word resilient because we have no choice to be.
Right.
But when they get to see how creative you've had to be, how stubborn you've had to be, because we know the good lawyers can be stubborn, and how creative and flexible you had to be to get to where you are. They really get to see the world for a brief moment, whether it's a 30-minute, 40-minute keynote. They get to see it for a brief moment and experience that. And hopefully they can apply it to a challenge in their life to help them get through it. Because I think we all have disabilities, just some are more visible than others, and some are more short-term, mid-term, long-term. But getting them to experience what you and I have gotten through really can let them know, A, it's possible. Two, it might not happen the first couple of tries, but eventually you'll get through.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think so many people, like you said, everybody has a disability in some way. People who don't have visible ones often kind of create their own limitations, whether it's mindset. So being able to see people who, you haven't really had a choice but to be creative, it helps totally shift, I think, the idea of what people believe disability is.
Right. And it even took me a long time to really know what having a disability was. Because when I was younger, I would try to mask it, right? Like, I don't have a disability, I just roll a chair. And, I'd have to joke around with able-bodied people to fit in. But it wasn't to Jenny LaFleur did this blog post years ago. She's the Chief Accessibility Officer at Microsoft. Before I even met her, she wrote a blog post that disability was a strength. And I remember that was the first thing that would start changing my mindset. not knowing I would ever work on Microsoft and be peers, but really just starting to feel comfortable to own my disability, to really go, you know what? Without my disability, I wouldn't be who I was. I wouldn't be the stubborn person. I wouldn't be the understanding leader, the vulnerable leader. Like, I wouldn't have had those skills if I didn't have to go through my unique journey. And then when you can look at your disability as really something that didn't prevent you from doing anything, but gave you a tool to learn to do things and do things differently, really builds a skill set that people without disabilities don't usually get to develop.
Yeah, exactly. And I similar trajectory. I masked it as well. I didn't want to acknowledge it. And, for people who don't have disabilities, like to just imagine for a second that, we're moving through the world with visible differences, but we're so uncomfortable with the bodies that we've been born with because we don't feel safe to show up and acknowledge it because the world isn't designed for us. And I think you're absolutely right. It is a strength. It's a superpower. It gives you the ability to even at a level of emotional intelligence that most people don't have, right? We have a level of empathy for other humans, and sometimes that can be frustrating because you don't understand why other people don't see things this way. Like, how can you not extend empathy to people who are struggling or have a harder journey? So yeah, I think you're absolutely right in saying that it's, we're some of the most creative minds, and getting us in the room will solve a lot of problems.
Well, yeah, and getting us in a room and have us have a point of view and be able to relate, like, it's not lost on me. Like, most of my peers, I'm usually the first person they ever meet with a disability that's a peer to them, right? Like, I'm a senior leader now, and I'm sure senior leaders have people with disabilities in their organization somewhere down beneath there, or they might have a family member with a disability. But when they get to see you doing a role like theirs, like designing and developing great products, that you're a lot like them, like, am I going to pay my mortgage? Am I going to do these things? I just happen to have a disability. It really brings them where the only thing different between them and I they get to see is I use a wheelchair and they walk in the office, and I might use assistive devices where they maybe don't have to, or they might choose to if it's a productivity increase. But I think it's just us being there, doing the role that they didn't assume we could do.
Right.
And to be more like them than different, like they want to think, that really brings empathy front and center into the boardroom.
Yeah. Oh, beautifully said. I couldn't agree more. How can people get in touch with you, Dave, for speaking opportunities, and are there specific venues you're looking for?
Well, they can reach out to me at dave@davedame.com is my email. My website's davedame.com, real original. But follow me on LinkedIn. I used to be on Twitter, not so much anymore. I'm more on LinkedIn, but I'm David Dame on LinkedIn. So please follow me. I try to share how I see the world and what I'm doing and reflection through my eyes. If you think that's of value, follow me, and I would like to know your story as well.
Do you have any words of wisdom? I mean, I think it's always important to speak to not only the people with disabilities, but I think parents of children with disabilities. I think that our message is so impactful because you and I were both fortunate enough to be born into a family of parents who were our biggest advocates. And we're lucky, and not everybody has that experience. And I think a lot of parents assume that what the doctors tell them is the gospel. And right. So for us to have parents who are like, I don't really care what you have to say, we're going to make sure our kids have the opportunities. I think, do you have any words of wisdom around that?
I do, and I can't relate to being parents because my wife and I decided not to have kids. But as a parent, I can imagine you're torn between, am I going to care for my disabled child the right way? And is the medical people telling me how to meet their needs? But at the same time, like you would your other kids, how would you guide them, push them, and let them realize they can be whatever they want to be? So it's got to be that tough balance of, okay, there's information we need, but then still imagine what the world could be. Like, I think our parents probably could see things others couldn't. So even though they would hear what the science is, what it is now, they could see it tomorrow. They could see something different, but they don't want to make that total decision for you, but they don't want to close doors for you either. So how do you nurture your child? With giving them a kick in the butt when it's needed too, and to do that. So I would just like to say, if you can imagine a different world for your child, then they'll have a different world available to them. So be imaginative, believe in yourself, and realize it won't always be a happy path. There's going to be a lot of ups and downs, as you know, through that journey. But that journey will be theirs. It'll be yours. You'll have that together. And that's a bond most parent and children won't get to have, is the extra effort needed. And then the ability to let your disabled child become more independent. Because I see some parents, they just want to take care, protect them from the world and that. But that's got to be hard on the parent when they see us move away for university, move into another city for a first job, and trust others to care for them like they did. Easy being a parent, but as you and I talk so lovely about our parents and our appreciation, know that, my God, we're always going to love you and grateful for you to give us this imperfect, perfect life that we can imagine.
Yeah. So beautifully said. Thank you, Dave. I'm so grateful that you spent this time chatting with me, and I know this conversation is really gonna positively impact how people view this need to change the landscape for accessibility. And I hope people reach out to you for speaking opportunities, because I mean, the impact you make in a room full of people is just, it's amazing.
Thank you. And thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining me on the Hiding in Plain Sight podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and please take a moment to subscribe and leave a review. Feedback and episode ideas help us reach more listeners. I would love to connect with you further. You can visit my website at lindseymazza.com and add me on Instagram at @the_Lindsey_Mazza. Until next time, keep sharing your stories and vulnerabilities, because one story at a time connects us all.